The bitter February wind cut through downtown Chicago like a knife, whipping around the towering glass buildings and sending pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks with their heads down. Snow had fallen overnight, leaving a thin white blanket over the city that was already turning to gray slush under the relentless foot traffic of the morning commute. Bethany Walker pulled her navy blue wool coat tighter around her shoulders as she descended the steps into Union Station. The 28-year-old marketing coordinator had lived in Chicago for 6 years, but she still wasn't used to the brutal Midwest winters. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she made her way through the bustling terminal, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The station was packed with commuters rushing to catch their trains, their faces buried in phones or newspapers, everyone focused on their own morning routine. Bethany glanced at her watch. 7:45 a.m. She had 15 minutes before her train to the suburbs, where she worked at a mid-sized advertising firm. It was the same routine she'd followed for the past 3 years, ever since she'd moved to her small apartment in Lincoln Park. As she walked toward Platform 12, something caught her eye near the information booth. A small figure sat huddled against the wall, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. Bethany slowed her pace, her attention drawn to what appeared to be a young boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, wearing nothing but a thin gray hoodie and jeans with holes in the knees. His sneakers were worn through at the toes, and his dark hair was matted and unkempt. The boy was shivering violently, his arms wrapped around his knees as he tried to make himself as small as possible. His lips had a bluish tint, and his cheeks were red and chapped from the cold. Bethany felt her heart clench as she watched him, noticing how other commuters simply walked past without a second glance, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the suffering child. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching down to his level. The boy looked up with wide, frightened eyes. They were a striking shade of green, but filled with wariness and exhaustion. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The boy didn't answer immediately, just stared at her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Bethany could see that he was trying to stop his teeth from chattering, but the cold was too much for his small body to handle. "I'm Bethany," she said gently. "What's your name?" "T. Tyler," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the noise of the station. "Tyler. That's a nice name. Are you here by yourself?" Bethany asked, looking around to see if there was an adult nearby who might be with him. Tyler nodded, his eyes filling with tears that he quickly tried to wipe away. "I don't have anywhere to go," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. Without hesitation, Bethany began unbuttoning her coat. The expensive wool garment had been a Christmas gift from her parents, and she'd worn it almost every day since winter began. But looking at Tyler's small, shivering form, she knew what she had to do. "Here," she said, wrapping the coat around his shoulders. It was far too big for him, but it immediately began to warm his tiny frame. "This will help." Tyler's eyes widened in disbelief. "I can't take your coat, lady. You'll be cold." "I'll be fine," Bethany assured him, though she was already feeling the bite of the frigid air through her thin blouse. "I'm just going to work. You need this more than I do." The boy pulled the coat tighter around himself, and for the first time, Bethany saw a small smile cross his face. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. What neither of them noticed was that a local news crew had been setting up nearby, preparing to film a segment about the city's efforts to help the homeless during the harsh winter months. The cameraman, adjusting his equipment, had inadvertently captured the entire exchange. The reporter, Janet Morrison, had been interviewing station security when she noticed the touching scene unfolding behind them. "Keep rolling," she whispered to her cameraman, her journalistic instincts kicking in as she witnessed this act of spontaneous kindness. As Bethany stood up, preparing to head to her train, she noticed a woman with a microphone approaching them. The reporter was followed by a man with a large camera, and suddenly, Bethany realized what was happening. "Excuse me," Janet Morrison said with a warm smile. "I'm Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News. I couldn't help but notice what you just did for this young man. Would you be willing to talk to us about it?" Bethany felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She glanced around and noticed that several other commuters had stopped to watch, their attention drawn by the presence of the news crew. Some were holding up their phones, recording the scene. "I really don't think it's necessary," Bethany said, wrapping her arms around herself as the cold began to seep through her clothing. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "I'm not so sure about that," Janet replied, looking meaningfully at the dozens of people who had walked past Tyler without stopping. "What you did was extraordinary. In a world where people often look the other way, you saw someone in need and acted without hesitation." Tyler, still wrapped in Bethany's coat, looked up at her with admiration. "She saved me," he said simply. "I was so cold I couldn't feel my fingers anymore." The small crowd that had gathered began to murmur approvingly. An elderly woman stepped forward, pulling a $20 bill from her purse. "Here, young man," she said, pressing it into Tyler's hand. "Get yourself something warm to eat." A businessman reached into his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill. "This is for you too, son," he said, his usual stern expression softened with compassion. More people began to approach, offering money, food, and warm clothing. Bethany watched in amazement as the scene unfolded around her. The boy who had been invisible to everyone just minutes before was now the center of attention, receiving kindness from strangers who had been moved by witnessing one simple act of generosity. "Tell us about yourself," Janet said to Bethany as the camera continued to roll. "What made you decide to give up your coat?" Bethany shifted uncomfortably, still not used to being the center of attention. "I just saw a child who was cold and in need. I couldn't walk away from that. My coat is just a thing. It can be replaced. But a person's well-being, especially a child's, that's irreplaceable." The reporter turned to Tyler. "And what about you, Tyler? How long have you been on your own?" Tyler looked down at his hands, the question clearly difficult for him to answer. "My mom got sick last month," he said quietly. "She's in the hospital, and I don't have anywhere else to go. I've been staying here at night because it's warm and safe." The crowd around them had grown larger, and many people were visibly moved by Tyler's story. A woman in a business suit stepped forward, introducing herself as Sarah Chen, a social worker with the city's Department of Children and Family Services. "Tyler, I'd like to help you," she said gently. "We have resources available, and we can make sure you're safe and warm while we figure out the best way to help you and your mother." As the impromptu interview continued, Bethany found herself answering questions about her life, her work, and her philosophy about helping others. She spoke about growing up in a small town in Ohio, where neighbors looked out for each other, and how she'd always believed that kindness was contagious. "When we see someone doing good, it inspires us to do good too," she said, glancing around at the crowd of people who had stopped to help Tyler. "That's what I'm seeing here today. One small act led to so many others." The news crew spent another 20 minutes interviewing various people in the crowd, capturing their reactions and the spontaneous outpouring of support for Tyler. By the time they finished, the boy had received over $300 in cash, several warm jackets, food, and most importantly, the promise of real help from social services. As the crowd began to disperse, Bethany realized she had missed her train, but as she looked at Tyler, now warm and smiling, surrounded by people who cared about his well-being, she knew it had been worth it. The news segment aired that evening during the 6 o'clock broadcast, and by morning, the video had been shared thousands of times on social media. Bethany's phone began ringing before she was even fully awake, and she found herself fielding calls from local newspapers, radio stations, and even a few national news outlets. At work, her colleagues greeted her with congratulations and praise. Her boss, Margaret Stevens, called her into the office first thing Monday morning. "Bethany, I have to say, what you did was remarkable," Margaret said, gesturing for her to sit down. "You've brought positive attention not just to yourself, but to our company. I've had several clients call this morning asking about our corporate social responsibility initiatives." Bethany felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I really didn't do it for attention, Margaret. I just saw someone who needed help. I know that. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful," Margaret replied. "Authentic kindness can't be manufactured or bought. It has to come from the heart. And that's what people responded to in your story." Throughout the day, Bethany received emails and messages from people around the country who had seen the news story. Many shared their own stories of kindness they had witnessed or experienced. A teacher in Denver wrote about how she had shown the video to her students, leading to a discussion about compassion and community service. A businessman in Atlanta mentioned that the story had inspired him to volunteer at a local homeless shelter. But the most meaningful message came from Tyler himself. Sarah Chen, the social worker, had helped him get access to a computer at a local community center, and he had sent Bethany a carefully typed email. "Dear Ms. Bethany," it read, "I wanted to thank you again for giving me your coat. It wasn't just about being warm. It was about feeling like someone cared about me. The social worker lady helped me visit my mom in the hospital, and she's doing better. The doctors say she might be able to come home soon. I'm staying with a nice foster family now, and they're teaching me how to use the computer. I hope I can see you again someday to thank you in person. Your friend, Tyler." Bethany felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read the message. She immediately typed back, telling Tyler how happy she was to hear about his mother's progress and asking if she could visit him soon. The following Saturday, Bethany made the drive to Tyler's foster home in a quiet suburb about an hour from downtown Chicago. The house was a modest two-story colonial with a neat front yard and a swing set in the back. Tyler's foster mother, Linda Rodriguez, greeted Bethany at the door with a warm smile. "Tyler has been talking about you nonstop," Linda said, leading Bethany into the living room. "He's been so excited about your visit." Tyler came bounding down the stairs, his face lit up with joy. He was wearing new clothes and looked healthier than he had at the train station. His hair was clean and neatly combed, and the scared, hollow look in his eyes had been replaced by the bright curiosity of a normal 11-year-old boy. "Ms. Bethany," he exclaimed, running up to give her a hug. "I'm so glad you came." They spent the afternoon talking, playing board games, and getting to know each other better. Tyler told her about his new school, his foster siblings, and his plans to visit his mother again later that week. Bethany shared stories about her own childhood, her work, and her hobbies. "I've been thinking about what you said," Tyler told her as they sat on the back porch, watching the other children play in the yard, "about how kindness is contagious. I want to help other kids like me." "What do you mean?" Bethany asked, curious about his idea. "Well, there are probably other kids living at the train station or other places like that. Kids who need help but are too scared to ask for it. Maybe we could find a way to help them too." Bethany was struck by Tyler's maturity and compassion. Despite everything he had been through, he was thinking about how to help others in similar situations. "That's a wonderful idea, Tyler," she said. "Maybe we can work together to figure out how to make that happen." Over the next few weeks, Bethany and Tyler began meeting regularly to discuss their idea of helping other homeless children. They researched existing programs in the city and discovered that while there were several organizations working to address homelessness, there was still a significant gap in services specifically designed for children who had fallen through the cracks of the system. Tyler's insights proved invaluable. He knew which areas of the city homeless children were most likely to be found, what they needed most urgently, and how to approach them without scaring them away. Bethany used her marketing skills to develop a plan for reaching out to these children and connecting them with appropriate resources. They decided to call their initiative Warm Hearts, Warm Coats, a program that would provide not just clothing and immediate assistance, but also help connecting homeless children with social services, medical care, and educational opportunities. Margaret Stevens was so impressed with Bethany's initiative that she offered to have the advertising firm handle the program's marketing and outreach pro bono. Several other local businesses, inspired by the original news story, offered to contribute funding and resources. The first official Warm Hearts, Warm Coats event was held at Union Station on a cold Saturday morning in March. Bethany, Tyler, and a team of volunteers set up a table with warm clothing, hot chocolate, and information about available services. They also had social workers and counselors on hand to provide immediate assistance to any children who needed help. Janet Morrison returned with her news crew to cover the event, and Bethany was amazed to see how many people showed up to volunteer. The elderly woman who had been the first to offer Tyler money was there, along with the businessman who had given him $50. Sarah Chen brought several of her colleagues from social services, and Linda Rodriguez came with Tyler's foster siblings to help distribute clothing and food. By the end of the day, they had helped 12 children, connecting them with appropriate services and providing them with warm clothing and other necessities. But more importantly, they had created a network of people committed to continuing this work. "You know what strikes me most about this?" Janet Morrison said as she interviewed Bethany at the end of the event. "It all started with one simple act of kindness. You gave up your coat to help a child in need, and look what it's become." Bethany looked around at the bustling scene. Volunteers packing up supplies, social workers exchanging contact information with families, Tyler excitedly telling his foster siblings about the children they had helped. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she had been living her quiet, routine life, focused primarily on her work and her own concerns. "I think we all have the capacity for kindness," Bethany replied. "Sometimes we just need to see it in action to remember that." Tyler reminded me that we're all connected, and that even small acts of compassion can change lives. As the event wound down and people began to head home, Tyler approached Bethany with a serious expression on his face. "Ms. Bethany," he said, "I have some news. My mom is going to be released from the hospital next week. The doctors say she's going to be okay." Bethany felt her heart soar with happiness. "Tyler, that's wonderful news. And there's something else," he continued. "My mom and I are going to be able to get our own apartment. Linda and her family are going to help us, and Sarah says there are programs that can help my mom get back on her feet." "I'm so happy for you," Bethany said, giving him a hug. "You've been so brave through all of this." "I learned something important," Tyler said, looking up at her with those bright green eyes. "I learned that when bad things happen, there are still good people in the world who will help you. And I learned that once you've been helped, you want to help others too." As Bethany drove home that evening, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that cold February morning when she had given her coat to a shivering boy at the train station. She had not only helped Tyler, but had discovered a purpose she hadn't known she was looking for. The Warm Hearts, Warm Coats program continued to grow, eventually expanding to other cities across the Midwest. Bethany took on a new role at her company, focusing on corporate social responsibility initiatives, while also serving as the program's coordinator. Tyler, now reunited with his mother and thriving in school, became the program's youngest volunteer, using his own experiences to help other children in similar situations. Looking back, Bethany realized that the moment she had decided to give up her coat had been a turning point not just for Tyler, but for herself as well. She had learned that kindness was not just about the immediate impact on the person being helped, but about the ripple effects that spread outward, touching the lives of countless others. The simple act of giving her coat to a freezing boy had taught her that everyone has the power to make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. And in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent, that was a lesson worth sharing.